way we go to market as sales team has evolved. A lot of different reasons cause that to happen. But I'm telling you, there's a seismic change happening, and it has nothing to do with doing more outreaches. You're going to love this one. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another great episode of the Sales Evangelist Podcast. I'm your host, Donald C. Kelly, the Sales Evangelist. And I'm so excited for another great episode. I'm so excited to be here with you today. And on this episode, we have a fantastic guest. His name is Mr. Derek Rahn. Derek and I actually connected on LinkedIn. And one of the conversations that started this whole thing was around data, especially as we're going to market as sales teams doing our outreach and the way companies are going about doing things. Things have evolved. Things have changed a little bit. There's several trends that he's going to highlight, but one of them specifically is the use of data and how we can get more niche and more specific with the outreaches that we do. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, our show is dedicated to helping you know exactly what you should be doing to 3 to 5x your sales pipeline with quality opportunity and to increase your close rate. If you want to find more information about our show, you can go ahead and find more details in the show notes, as well as check out our LinkedIn prospecting course and how we're utilizing this as well to do outreach. Now, listen to what Derek has to share at the top of this episode, and also how he ties this all together with some of the trends that he's seeing going on. You're going to love it. Derek, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Donald. Pleasure to meet you. Great to be on. Big time follower.
Well, I appreciate this, man. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation this morning to go deeper into this idea. There's a seismic shift, so to speak, going on in our industry. And a lot of different industries a lot of different organizations are adjusting the way they're going to market with their sales teams. But data's got to be able to be a critical part of that to help us. And this is why I'm looking forward to the conversation today. Before we dive into that, why don't you take a second and tell us a little bit more about what you do and your world with data?
Yeah, my name is Derek Rahn. I've been in sales and marketing, specifically in the B2B data space for about 15 years. Currently, I'm the VP of Demand Generation at a Bay Area startup called Lead Genius. And, we're kind of at the core of this new kind of evolution of building your own database as part of, your intellectual property and the way that you think about a competitive intelligence being gained through data and through, really crafting tools that meet your team's individual needs. So I live it on a day-to-day basis. I've seen it over the last 15 years, starting at a company called Dun & Bradstreet, which is very common to the data space. People are probably familiar with that kind of legacy tool. But it's really interesting to see what's happening inside, especially SaaS space, as we kind of reach a pivot here in this moment in time. And again, what we're seeing with clients is pretty interesting.
So, in which I want to kind of just segue straight into. Yeah. What are some of the things that you're seeing right now before we go into data and how data is solving it? Some of the level of challenges you're seeing across the SaaS sales landscape when it comes to team going to market.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a couple themes that seem to be carrying through multiple conversations, whether that's with clients or with prospects in the generalized market. And one I think is a shift back to reps having to do more and having to bite off more onto their day-to-day workload. And some of that's fueled by AI. Some of that's fueled by, VC and Wall Street wanting companies to run leaner and be more profitable, right? You can't obviously have as many BDRs or as many sales engineers potentially on your staff, if you're trying to run a really lean sales organization. I think that, over the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of organizations try to trim and try to become more profitable and more lean. And that means that, sales reps, individual contributors are managing more of the stack, managing more of that life cycle, taking it even into customer success and into account management. So cradle to grave, I think is something that a lot more AEs are having to take on their shoulders as team sizers are shifted or right-sized, I guess people would say. But yeah.
Go back to that, Derek, because it's something. I mean, Scott Lisi and I had this conversation. Several people having this conversation around this notion. John Barris, I think, also talk about it a little bit about the we went so far to spread too thin, and there was this kind of like readjustment back to individuals, ICs, like doing what they're born to do, which is to sell and to take on some more of that responsibility. You're the data guy, but before we go deeper into the more data, is that an impact in a beneficial way, or is that, or is maybe it's too soon to tell, or is it, having a negative effect on performance where the ICs are taking on more of that role?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little early to tell.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that last year when we look at like quota attainment across different organizations, quota attainment is not where most leaders, sales and revenue leaders would want it to be. It's not as high as it's been in other years. Again, that could be a lot of budgets being scrutinized, longer sales cycles. I think that like a lot of teams are experiencing longer sales cycles. And, there's probably a kind of a get right period with ICs having to carry more of this bag. It takes time to figure out how much outreach I need to do versus how much customer relations I have to do versus how much time do I spend on active deals, and juggling those, those different priorities is always going to be a challenge, especially when you're going, back to a mindset. But yeah, I mean, I think that, the overall impact is probably a good one. When you have a lot of people touching a customer, there's more opportunities for miscommunication. There's more opportunities for us to kind of lose where the value connect is with that prospect, right? If someone's got an SDR and they're handing off an opportunity, and then an AE is taking it, and then they're dealing with a sales engineer, and then they're dealing with an account manager. That's a lot of people to bring into the fold, a lot of people to review notes on a customer. And so it can be harder to build relationships, and there's, potential, a value disconnect there that could be, in that many, daisy chain of events, different people touching a customer. So I think there's a period of right sizing, but, AEs have a lot more tools. When I was a full cycle rep 10 plus years ago, we didn't have AI. We didn't have, outreach and cadence tools at the same level that we do today, right? It was Yesware and Tout App and some other, it was some old players, right? We'd be like, what the heck is he talking about? But, before outreach, before SalesLoft, before a lot of these other, types of tools, automation tools were prevalent, it was like AEs doing mail merges, right? Inside of their system. So, we have a lot better tooling. And so, in one regard, we're better equipped to tackle a full sales cycle than we've ever been. At the same time, I just feel like wearing that many hats, it takes a real effort from the sales enablement side of things to be able to say, hey, here's the best practice for this activity, and this is what you should be replicating. So I think it takes more of kind of a centralized approach and team, instead of just, we got some BDR teams and there's a BDR manager and he kind of just runs that team. And then we got AEs and they've got a manager and they run their quota. It takes more of a conscious thinking from a centralization standpoint. And I think that's why we've seen also just like the number of revenue ops, sales ops, that title just increasing exponentially. If you look inside of like, where are these big organizations hiring?
Bro.
Most of them are hiring rev ops people, right?
Bro.
Most of them are hiring in that discipline. And that's because they're the force multipliers. So, it's getting the tooling right. It's having that centralized command, but you also have to have people in that revenue ops function who have been sellers in the past, who understand what it's like to deal with all these different priorities. And who can really go about things, in a non-defensive way about, hey, what is the biggest challenges we have to solve and where can we provide the biggest amount of uplift, meaning not having reps burn out because they're doing manual prospecting on LinkedIn or doing the things that reps don't really care to do, right? Because you're being asked to take on a lot more. That's, really, really valuable and important. So that's where I kind of see things shifting.
Yeah. You mentioned that first. I mean, we went down this rabbit hole with, when we started talking about the IC role evolution as far as trend. Any other trends that you're seeing right now when it comes to the data standpoint?
Yeah, there's two other trends I see. One is I'm seeing more focus on verticalization. Um, the old ways of selling software or selling services was you'd have dirt, right? You'd have a regional territory. Oh, you're in the Southwest, or you're in California, or you're in upstate New York, whatever, right? Your dirt
Yeah,
was zip code based, geographic focused, and it was like this person is going to know the businesses in their region and they're going to build relationships. That's the premise, at least, right?
uh-huh.
And that's all fine and dandy, but we have remote work, right? And there's so many headwinds to that approach. At the same time, we've seen the rise of vertical specific SaaS, right? So before, when we talked about CRMs, right, it was like Salesforce, HubSpot. Now there's a million different CRMs for different industries and different businesses, right? I mean, there's
100%.
a company that we're working with called Zenote that like focuses on spas and medical spas and like salons, right? You want to talk about like a specific niche.
I've seen
But
some for like the senior care community. I'm being in Florida. I'm
yeah,
like just sliver.
yeah, like not even like hospital in general. It's like
Nope.
senior care specific. Like, yeah. So the vertical the verticalization of SaaS is great because obviously a vertical solution can address more of the day-to-day challenges of those business operators. But that also means that your sales team has to be like so honed in and tapped into that exact market. With Amazon, as an example, right?
Mhm.
In the past, they've had regional based preferences and territory setups. They've shifted to more of a landscape of vertical based approach. And that was really led by their public sector team, right? Because
Hmm.
selling to the public sector is so unique. It's so different than selling to, other types of markets. And specifically, people that sell to the public sector have a specific set of pains and compliance and everything else, right? So
Yeah.
that team kind of, forged out hey, this is the way to do this. And now we're seeing all the AWS teams start to take more of a verticalized approach, and specifically like, great, who are these people selling to, knowing that industry in and out, the healthcare, the hospital workers, knowing how to sell to people that are selling to a specific audience and knowing that pain, especially in an era of remote work where you're not necessarily inside your dirt on a day-to-day basis, has become a
Hmm.
paradigm. That's one shift that I think is universal, and it's happening at the largest organizations in the world, and it's happening inside of vertical based sales organizations, right? So, and that goes back to specialization. You got to know who you're talking to, the tools they're living in, the pains that they have, and really really industry specific knowledge is how you ingrain your rapport and your subject matter expertise with the person, right? So
Yeah.
people trying to juggle over multiple different verticals, it's easy to say, oh, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. They're servicing a broader base that's not specific to me. But when they're living in a vertical day to day, they know, hey, there is this new law passed. Hey, this company,
Yes.
just emerged in this space. They're able to really speak to that, the language of that vertical, and I think that that's a huge piece. So that's one trend, and then the other trend that I think is really interesting is, SMB has always been this place that small and medium sized businesses has always been this place where it's like the big players are like, yeah, cost acquisition, the cost to maintain, the customer success, the life cycles, the average deal size. Is it really worth us having to tackle that? Or are we better
Hmm.
off just selling big enterprise deals? And I think that, a lot of these SaaS companies have reached a maturation point where like those big deals, those big install bases are, there's less and less of those deals available out there. And so they're having to pivot and focus down market now more than they previously maybe wanted to, right? Maybe they just said, hey, yeah, we'll let people be self-serve down here, and we'll kind of just, we'll view it from afar. And if it's right, it'll find its place in the market. Now I'm seeing more and more sales teams being equipped and tooled to go down market and actively go after SMBs. And I think that's largely because there's a need to continue to grow top line revenue. And it's like, what's left, right? What's left to conquer? But also there's becoming more and more data tools and ways of reaching those small businesses or measuring what small businesses they should be going after. Whereas before it was kind of a black box. Like I started my career at ADP, right? Before I was at Dun & Bradstreet, I was at ADP. So I was, selling payroll in a territory in Southern Arizona. And, I would go to enter in data inside of Salesforce, and the data quality in there. And there had been a rep there previously was horrific. It was garbage. There was no assistance from a centralized team, right? Like if I was trying to rely on, I'm going to go out and prospect this territory, I'm going to pull this zip code, report from my Salesforce.
Yeah.
70% of the time it was incorrect. And that's because, SMBs go in and out of business, too frequently, right? It's a high failure rate there. So it's really hard to maintain that data. So I think that we're starting to get enough of the data chops from that revenue ops team standpoint to be able to really say, okay, cool. Let's monitor an account base. Let's flag what's the 20% of these accounts that we should care about based on a number of factors. And that's using large language models, that's using AI, that's using a number of publicly available data sets now in order to determine that. And I think that, before it was like, hey, how are you going to prospect this effectively when half these businesses are going to be out of business in 6 months, or half these businesses already went out of business in the last 6 months, right? You have a really, really diminished return on prospecting investment and on headcount, right? But, again, with some of the changes, with some of the evolutions that are happening inside of all the systems that we've talked about, there's a lot more ability for an SMB focused rep to actually hit quota. And not only that, but to expand into some green space that has a real revenue upside for a SaaS business.
Love that. The SMB side, I would never, when you first mentioned that to me, I would never have thought that would be a topic that we would be covering for these enterprise level organizations, like some of these big organizations. I just would never ever thought that. But you bring up two things that that made this make sense. One was the fact that you have more and more, you have AI tools, and then two, just the data. There's no way you can just manually go and do this to be effective if we're just abolishing territories and using, I'm sitting here as a sales leader. I'm thinking about this now. I just heard this podcast and I'm like, Derek just makes some dope point. How do I start? What do I need to look at? How critical the data needs to be? And where do we go from here?
Yeah, it's funny because I think the methodology is one that Scott Leese and some of these other people are super familiar with it. And probably talked about, right? It's and there's books on this that have come in and out of models and favor, but it all starts with an ICP. Right. And I think that the ideal customer profile, and then looking at it and trying to segment it into as many unique ICPs as possible, right? That verticalization is critical. That's the reason that those vertical based SaaS companies, the ones that are succeeding on a data front, right? They're succeeding because they're like, hey, we're only going to sell to med spas, or hey, we're only going to sell to this vertical. Like when I first started working with Square, they're a customer that's in the payment space. Their fit from a market standpoint, this is 8 years ago. Their fit from a market standpoint was quick service restaurants, and they couldn't go to a traditional database because Dun & Bradstreet, ZoomInfo all categorized them as everything is food and beverage. Right, it was one big overarching categorization. Right, there wasn't any of that data on LinkedIn because food and beverage small business restaurants are not on LinkedIn, right? So we had to build a data strategy that was unique to them and unique to the data points and the triggers that really equivocate to better sales velocity, more meaningful conversations for the reps, right? And, show that those people are actually in business and are in a growth mode where changing payment solutions makes sense, right? As a fundamental business practice. So, again, it all comes back down to that ideal customer profile and being able to do segmentation, because better segmentation means, better messaging, means stronger value proposition to pitches. It means better market sizing. It means that you can actually plan, how big do my teams need to be in each one of these verticals? How many people do I have to throw at the problem? How do I right size this? And I think that the old days of, oh, I'm just going to go to this database and there's 300,000 restaurants in North America, so that's going to be my TAM, right? Without thinking about how do you categorize these different people and what people are not even worth a conversation, right? And what disqualifying factors can we layer on top of the data so that we don't have, reps chasing basically empty vans, right? With nothing inside of them, right? So I think that's really the maturation process from a data ops standpoint, is being able to say, okay, we need to really have a good, again, 10 years ago, when you were pitching a solution to a bunch of VCs, they're like, our addressable market is this big. And it was these large, grotesque numbers. Like, we have 500,000 businesses that we could sell to. And there was like, then they would kind of talk about, oh, well, initially we're going to sell to these 10,000, right? But even those estimates, they were just based on, kind of pulling stuff out of thin air, right? There wasn't a whole lot behind it in terms of like, okay, well, tell me exactly what these 10,000 companies are. If those investors ask that question, all of a sudden the people are starting to, backpedal. Well, we actually own about 5,000 right now. So the public web now has become this incredible resource, right? Just across so many different, data. There's just different data resources out there. And again, if you have teams that can crawl, that can scrape data for you, that can look at public record filings, that can find the communities in which your customers or your prospects live, there's a huge opportunity to create unique data strategies. And that's how that verticalized approach has worked for some of these companies. And that's how the small business approach has to work as well. Because again, there's just so many false positives out there from a database standpoint. If enterprise reps thought that the data in the CRM wasn't trustworthy before, now when we go and pivot to SMBs, again, there's got to be extreme faith. And so it's about, cutting it down and saying, hey, listen, we're super confident. We're 99% confident on this 20% of the market. And this is what our entire focus is going to be. And that has to be that centralized ops based approach, right? It can't be a bunch of reps trying to figure out their own thing. Hey, just throw bodies at it. Just throw 10 more SDRs at it and try to figure it out. No, it's got to be a centralized data science led approach. And it's going to be using the tooling that, the large language models, the web scraping tools that have, started to find themselves in the marketplace.
Bro, like you came in today and just like, and I hope people really understood what you were saying, like, and taking notes, like as I was, because for me, the premise back to this is, yes, there needs to be a sense of overhaul, but in order for us to be able to run faster, we really need to just slow down. I mean, that doesn't make any sense, but the concept is, just is really there. And I want to go back from my perspective, like coaching teams or working with sellers or, doing outreach, especially the emails outreach. The messaging is just really hard on email. Relevancy is critical, and people want to know that you know them before you even reach out to them. And the only way you can know them before you reach out to them is go back to what you're saying. Can I speak your language? Not that you're a small business, but specifically you're a small business in freaking the janitorial space within whatever segment, subset, buying oil. So it's like there's so much with it. But if you can, if I feel that somebody is doing a general pitch to me, I don't pay attention to it anymore because we've been pitched so much. But when you can pitch with that that you sound like you belong, like you're local, then I will at least entertain that conversation. And the only way it's going back to this, like RevOps just need to shape up. And if you don't have RevOps, you need to,
you're in for a rough future if you don't have good RevOps function. So yeah.
Dang, bro. My goodness. Any other remarks that you would give as you get ready to wrap this thing up? Closing remarks that you would give to a sales leader if she's listening to this, or a rep that can take this back home to the fam and say, hey, I heard this on the podcast.
I think the biggest thing is that, companies have to own their data strategy now. I truly think the days of, people buying a subscription to a one size fits all data provider are it's really, really numbered. And it's because you have to be more nuanced, and you can't possibly, one aggregate data source can't have all of the nuance for all these different industries. It's just not possible. Right. So, if teams want to see more success and they want to replicate the behavior of their best performing reps and the people that are doing most successful, the only way to do that is through automation. The only way that you do that is with a centralized revenue ops team that actually goes out and says, okay, cool, we need to find these indicators over our population and help to expand our population so we can grow this team. So again, that's just ownership of data strategy. That's not buying a tool. That's not saying, oh, great, we're going to go and buy Dun & Bradstreet, or we're going to go and buy Zoom Info. That's going on to say, we're going to know everything that we can about the businesses that are in this specific vertical, because it leads to better conversations, and it's going to give us the chance to win at a rate that's going to smoke our competition, right? And that's building that database and that data muscle, right? Really as a strength and as a competitive advantage as a business, as opposed to, oh, we're just going to buy the best in class tool that everyone else buys, right? I think that those days are very, very numbered.
Days are numbered, man. Listen, are there any books, any resources, any places where people can go? I'm sure to your website where we can get more information on how we can become more cognizant of data or educate ourselves on that.
Yeah, there's a great podcast that I listen to called Hard Fork that talks about the tech space. So that's a good podcast listen if you're interested in, and you're on Spotify. That's a great podcast. Our blog, the leadgenius.com/resources, we produce consistent content on this subject matter. We actually have a white paper right now out on how people are using large language models inside the finance sector in order to target SMBs, right? Yeah. So these are, finance teams that are trying to, basically sell lines of credit and go after small businesses. And it's like, how are they using these large language models in order to increase their actual, hit rate, and to also decrease bad debt and bad defaults? By using data science. So there's a great blog post there, but our resources, and you can always just ping me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, always happy to jump on the phone and just talk data with people and talk strategy with people. This is the world I live in. So exciting stuff.
We'll put the link back in the show notes so folks can get access to your LinkedIn, get back to your website, and have the phone number there as well. But Derek, this was like more than I asked for. I was hoping for in an amazing way. So thank you so much for bringing this in and shedding some light on this for us. Appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Donald.
Hey, that was Derek Rahn. If you haven't connected with him as of yet, please go ahead and find his details down below in the show notes. Tell him that you heard him here on the Sales Evangelist Podcast. I know he will be super grateful for that. I will be grateful for you doing that. But one of the things I want to just emphasize that he shared was this concept of going to the vertical. I've seen this time and time again. I mentioned it in the episode, but especially the teams that we're working with. So many teams have folks that, just go jack of all trade. But the ones that are really hyper-focused, they're really niche, they tend to see a little bit more effectiveness with their communication, with their messaging, with the value proposition, and ultimately with the results, because the buyers feel that those people are industry authority leaders. It's a fantastic point, a fantastic strategy, and I would encourage you to take advantage of it. Again, if this is your first time listening to our show, go ahead and subscribe. If you need help with your outreach, go ahead and check us out. We have our LinkedIn prospecting course. We have a new cohort beginning in just a little bit, I think in 2 months, and we'd love to have you join that, as well as our our sales mastermind, where sales reps get a chance to practice and to engage and to try their value proposition and to get feedback from other sellers in the field. You're going to love it. I would love to have you join it or find more details about it. You can see all that down below in the show notes. As always, I want you to thrive. I want you to succeed. I want you to 3 to 5x your sales pipeline with quality ops. I want you to close more deals. But most importantly, I want you to raise your level of thinking and go out and do big things. See you on the next one.